So basically what I'm saying is that it kind of suggests that centralized labs alone are not capable of producing all the successes that we want. And so what I would advocate for is a more blended approach with what are distributed and open approaches, something like Adobe's Kickbox, which I think kind of diffuses that innovation function across the organization. It invokes minimal hierarchy, creates incentive structures for wider collaboration across the organization. Because it's universally accessible, it can attract the talent that it wants to. Like ultimately with a lab, someone has to say that you can go or not. With an open program that allows you and provides you tools to be innovative, you can actually go to that program and actually draw down against those tools and start something on your own, which is a much better signal to the culture, in my view, again, to the points raised before. And it creates that idea that widespread capacity for innovation is actually important. So maybe less innovation lab as a closed experiment and more innovation library as an open community resource, I think is something to think about, another paradigm to add to your mental models. It also may, in fact, mean that whatever comes up from open innovation systems are less vulnerable to the transition, because anyone who's kind of given and created anything within the system itself has already managed all the relationships and had to deal with the trade-offs and had to socialize their ideas with all of their colleagues throughout the organization already. So it's less vulnerable. It's not a direct handoff, but you've actually co-created and built in a bit more of a wide fashion. I also think that an open approach also allows governing institutions to walk away from sunk costs more easily. The staged methodology of something like Kickbox is interesting because it's built to promote innovative ideas through the innovation cycle, but it's also built to off-ramp frequently all the bad ideas that actually shouldn't be implemented. And so you can walk away from those things. Like any good innovation program should also have a built-in exit strategy and the ability to jettison things that are just not important. Kickbox's program has a 6% success rate from start to finish. Not everything that gets tried in an innovative kind of space ought to see the light of day at the end. I think as a result of kind of all of this, that open systems are less likely to have to contend with issues like risk intolerance. They can engage in more genuine experimentation. You can walk away more easily, test hypotheses that may go untested otherwise. All that to say, the true test of any kind of innovative approach is not what goes in, but what comes out. Like results at the end of the day is what's most important. Although I've kind of taken the time to set up the two things as a dichotomy because that's what I've been asked to do, I don't know that it's necessarily a true one. It may in fact be a false dichotomy. They may not be mutually exclusive. I would argue that if you're interested in genuine experimentation, maybe we ought to A/B test these two things against one another. So let's see what a dedicated lab can do on a given problem, assign the same problem within an open innovation structure, and then assign the same problem within the status quo bureaucracy and see what happens. What do they generate, at what cost, and at what outcome? And so then you can actually get a better understanding of when to deploy certain tools, because a lab won't always be the tool. We risk the same thing as everything looking like a nail if we see the lab as the hammer that can fix everything. And so that's basically kind of the two different pieces. What I think you might find happening in the end of all of this is if you do test these two things, dedicated lab structures might in fact produce a lot of sustaining innovations. At least in my experience, they're really focused on doing what we do already faster, better, and cheaper. There is a lack, at least where I'm from, in terms of innovation labs, looking at brand new ideas out of the box. And that's about doing things differently, and that is about breaking the innovation trade-offs that Bill had talked about. Again, I think the health of the institutions requires some kind of balance of the two things. And I actually think that what Derek said about we need to bring a better understanding of the relationship between the design we're trying to bring to the system and the design that already exists there was actually really, really important. That goes understated most of the time. And innovation for me is a lot like what Charles had indicated. It's not a green line or a red line, but all of the mess in between. And where you position those labs and what kind of strategies you deploy in them is actually a really important choice architecture. Like how you choose in that space before you start is actually incredibly important because it actually leads to different kinds of outcomes. And what I see is a lot of people getting swept up in let's have a lab without necessarily thinking through what is it that you want to actually achieve and what is the best way to do that. And it's still an early culture, to Charlie's point too. So I think that's going to come with time. But I would encourage you all to be more thoughtful about when you choose to deploy what and why. And I'll leave it maybe at that.
Thank you so much, Nick.
No problem.
Next, I'd really like to go to Stephanie. So you actually Stephanie Wade leads is director of the Innovation Lab at OPM, the Office of Personnel and Management in the United States, which is a lab that focuses on design thinking. So you, in some way, are the central repository and a very kind of cool place to be, but you're also focused on disseminating all those ideas across and kind of dissipating them across the federal government. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your approach and how you kind of straddle that balance?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, that was a really good summary. We are based in one agency in the federal government in the U.S., but we actually have a federal-wide mission. So we don't work within one agency. We're there to help foster innovation across the government workforce, so across the 2 million people that make up the U.S. government. So it's a pretty big group to try to influence and to bring change to. But that's really what we're about. And I think that a lot of what Nick said rings true. If you only had innovation in a large organization, we're gonna talk on a large scale because I think there's different dynamics when you're A, in the private sector, and B, in a small organization. But we're talking about large sector, public organization. There really does need to be a blend. That if there is only one place in the federal government where there's innovation, innovation's really not going to happen, right? If we try to steward it and keep it and hold it close and protect it, we can't reach 2 million people. And nor should we, because that's not really what the mission and the ethos of design thinking is about. We're about trying to make sure that everybody feels like they can be innovators. Everyone feels like there's a culture they can embrace and that lets them tap into an attitude for change, of creativity, right? Of being inspired, being able to connect to the reason why they decided to work for the large federal government. And I think that what we offer helps them come back to those roots because it is human-centered design-based, and we believe in designing and improving federal government as quickly as we can with the people that we're designing for, right? Designing with the public, for the public. So if we only have that in one place, we're really limiting the capacity to bring about broad-scale change that we wish to see across a very large bureaucracy. However, if it were as simple as Adobe Kickbox's model, which for those of you who didn't know or don't know, they literally have a toolkit. It's a red box that everybody starts with, and there's like a little thing. There's a couple of things inside. They get some money to be able to go out and test ideas, and they have a sheet of like 6 steps. Go do this, 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 and this. And go, you're innovators. And I think that there's a beauty in that kind of easy access, right? Of inspiring people at a very basic level to kind of relinquish a lot of the rules and social norms that we have in organizations and in businesses and how you're supposed to think, act, do. And so it lets this immediate release of like, hey, I can actually tap into something that I haven't in so long, right? Creativity. The sky's the limit. I can get excited and passionate about my job again. And that's a beautiful thing, and that's a great foundation, I think, for building change across an organization. However, that alone isn't going to create the kind of change that I think we want to see, because you can do those 6 steps in that formulaic way, but I think to the quote that was said earlier this morning, there's design and then there's good design. What is it we're really designing for? Everyone can go out and come up with really good ideas, and there's probably 1,000 sitting in this room, and we could come up with them in about 15 minutes. But that doesn't mean that's what's needed. And I think, so what we serve in the role in the lab is as the pointy end of the spear, to enter into government, to bring and introduce these ideas of human-centered design and the change that it can bring in government in really serving the people that we're there for in a much better way. In a faster way, and really trying to get to the needs that the public has. So we serve in 3 roles, and I'm going to just quickly talk about our 3 goals and kind of where I see an I team, X team, which I actually never even heard of before this panel existed, and I was like, crap, which one are we? I don't know. What is this? And I think it's an interesting conversation. Actually does show the evolution of where I think innovation and labs are going, in the sense that we can start to have a more deep conversation about this in general. Side note, so thanks for that. So we serve as leaders, doers, and teachers across the federal government. So we serve as that I-team, subject matter experts who know design thinking, who know human-centered design, and understand how to bring it to the federal government in a way that really gets at the deep core problems that government is wrestling with, right? We can tackle problems that haven't been solved for 20 years, and we've actually done this, right? We really take those really big knotted messes of things, right? And we really try to unlock them. And so we serve as the experts then going to other agencies and helping them think through what is, people come to us all the time and they say, we want to start an innovation lab. We were the first in the federal government, which I should say, and we're the only one who works across the entire federal government. So they come to us often, they're like, yeah, we want an innovation lab too. And it's like, okay. And a couple of people have said that today, well, why? So we serve as subject matter experts in really helping them think strategically about their agency needs, about what they're willing to commit resources to, how that works, and what it might serve, right? So if you don't have the I team, you can't build the X team, I don't think. And I think that's really where we've come to. We serve as that I team to be the subject matter experts to help make sure that design is done well to the degree that we have the ability to influence it. But we want to do that in such a way that we build capacity across the federal government and to make the government an X team, to lower the barriers to innovation and creativity, and quickly iterating to really good problem solvings. Solutions. So the second one is doing. We actually conduct human-centered design thinking projects. We partner with other agencies, so we don't do it for them, as an I team might, right, to kind of sit in our little hole and figure out the answers on our own. We partner with the agency. They have to commit staff to the integrated design project team, we call them, so that they design with us. They're the subject matter experts in their agency, but they also learn, right? So we're serving as the subject matter experts, the I team, to train an X team in a very deep way. But we also, along the way, help solve those agency problems, and we stay with them through implementation. We don't stop at prototyped ideas. We actually work with them to really wrestle and make sure that as the ideas are implemented, because change doesn't happen if good ideas don't actually do anything, if they're not actually implemented, to continually design in that process, because there's so many iterations that happen once you're actually trying to implement a change, that it's really important to have the design team there with the subject matter experts in the agency, helping to navigate bureaucracy, finding roadblocks, redesigning, testing, redesigning, running through another roadblock. There's so many stages that we still think is really helpful for us to be there. So again, working with them, for them. And lastly, the teaching. We actually hold boot camp sessions once a month for anybody in the federal agency to come and learn the basics of human-centered design. And I think that, again, the I team as a subject matter experts, we're even redesigning our curriculum to incorporate best practices and changing up our model in itself. If we weren't there to do that and steward them through that process and to understand how, from our perspective as experts, how it's best to teach, how it's best for them to learn, we are inspiring them at the end of the day. They can't go out and do a very complicated design thinking project. You can't give them the toolkit and say, great, now go fix welfare. That's not going to happen. That would be a bit of a disaster in that sense. But we want to inspire them to think about how they can apply design thinking in their agency when they go back to their cubicle. Like, we start there. And then trying to think about our role as stewards in someone's growth over time across the federal government. What is our responsibility as change makers in stewarding the people that get inspired but then go back to that cubicle in the same bureaucracy and the same agency with the same boss, with the same schedule, and all those types of things. And so we really look at it as being an I team that's trying to build an X team in a lot of ways, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now, next person is Nigel Jacob, and he's founder of the Mayor's Office for New Urban Mechanics. It's a civic innovation incubator and R&D lab, and is actually quite unique in that it represents that rare breed that Nick talked about, is a place where actually brand new ideas come to shape. And the kind of parallel, the way that I've always kind of thought of you, and you probably have a much better description, but I think of the kind of Lockheed Martin's kind of skunk works, but instead of for warcraft, for urban craft, of like bringing technology and trends and ideas together, kind of, but for a very kind of noble goal around civic engagement. But I'll let you describe in your own words kind of what you do.
Thank you. So thanks very much for that. So the Mayor's Office of Neural Mechanics is a civic innovation lab and incubator. We've been around for just about 6 years. We were started by our previous mayor, Thomas Menino, who had this sense that governments can innovate and clearly have a demonstrated track record of doing that. The challenge is that we don't do it often enough and that we do it in an ad hoc way. And he realized at the time that there needs to be someone whose day job it is to sort of push forward and to explore where we should be going next instead of as it relates to city services. So that is our job. Our job is to create the future of city services. And our primary lens for doing that is always to look at how we are impacting people's lives, right? So innovation for us is entirely about who are we helping and how do we impact and make someone's life better? How do we make living in our city as wonderful experience as possible? So to that end, what we've discovered, a big part of the problem that we see in terms of the big barriers to government innovation, and obviously there are many, but one of them is that the way that we think about doing things is problematic, right? So traditionally, so using the lens of IT, because I've worked in we've done a lot of IT projects over the years. There's this kind of waterfall methodology that we think about in government, either explicitly or implicitly. It will take either many months and sometimes years to get something done. You come up with this big Gantt chart, some big long-term project plan, and usually that it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, and you really don't get a sense as to whether or not the thing will work until the very end. So that to me is fraught with risk, right? So because anything could break in that process. So what we have discovered is that, and in a sense, the bureaucracy, the job of bureaucracy in this sense is to kind of mitigate risk, the risk of that process using this old way of thinking. And I think that we've just never had more effective tools to manage risk in local government. And so what we've developed is a highly experimental approach to exploring new tools for education, new tools for public works, the whole range of different things that services that cities deliver, and where we are always, sorry, I almost swallowed my gum. We are always testing where we should be going with a new project, right? So the idea here is that in the old way of thinking, we had to, you had to hope that at the end that you would produce a service that the public would use, which is really crazy. In terms of if you're hoping that you'll have some kind of real impact at the end. And so what we've been developing is a highly experimental approach in which we'll test it. We've talked a lot about prototyping and testing, and so essentially that's what we do in neuromechanics. There have been a lot of really interesting metaphors and language used over the day. And so I rewrote my talking points about 8 times to kind of address different things that I heard. So one thing I want to say about labs, the lab as a metaphor is fraught with problems, it seems to me, right? Because certainly all the work that's happening around public sector innovation, it cannot all be characterized as a lab, right? There's a lot of chief innovation officers out there, many of them are here. There are just many different ways of thinking about innovation. And I think we're not all building labs, right? The other problem of the lab, I think, is actually something that you highlighted. It is the skunkworks model that springs to mind. It depends what you mean by skunkworks, right? So many labs, I think some of the best known historically labs have been very kind of blue sky labs, right? Their job is to invent the future. And usually what that means is, what has often happened is that they come up with some incredible new product of some kind that is impossible to sell, right? Because the rest of is totally out of sync with the rest of the organization. So when I think of us as a lab, there's some very unique constraints that we have in the public sector. At the end of the day, we are a service delivery organization, right? So it means that whatever we're developing, whatever program, product, or service, has to be something that the rest of the organization can actually deliver, right? I can't be building lasers into how we clean roads, right? Because I have trucks that do this, right? So I have to operate within the constraints that we're given, and so hence the strong reliance on design. But there's that that very specific grounding, I think that we need to be very careful of. And then there is this issue of scaling. So I totally agree that one of the ways in which we can very easily go wrong with the lab metaphor is that something gets stuck in the lab, right? Something gets stuck as a prototype. And I think that's an error that I've seen many times in government, that we develop pilot projects that essentially stay as pilot projects, right? We never do anything to expand the scale or expand the number of people that are accessing whatever that thing is. And so having this strong focus on scaling, I think is critically important. And I think that we often think that, that once you build a thing, it makes a lot of sense, and you've got all the data to show that it actually works. You hand it off, in some glittering form to the people whose job it is to deliver that thing, and it goes absolutely nowhere, right? And so there has to be some process by which you're actively working with the rest of the organization to actually deliver that thing. When I think of, what is the right model for the innovation team, I think, unfortunately, I don't have a specific answer here. So I think unfortunately, it depends. It depends on what it is you're trying to do, right? If innovation in your context is about incremental business process change, right? You want to change the way that you deliver services incrementally over time, you probably don't want something centralized, right? You want to probably train everyone in Six Sigma or something, right? That is one style. In Denver, Colorado, they have a team there that has developed something called Denver Peak Academy with exactly that vision. So their vision around innovation is that the entire organization is everyone's job to innovate, in the sense of everyone, at least people that want to do this, are given the tools and the training to be able to incrementally look at the processes that they're engaged in and then push things forward. If you're trying to build a rocket ship, a distributed approach to innovation probably doesn't work as well, right? Because you have to sort of centralize skills, and maybe there's a way of doing it, but you have to centralize, for the most part, skills or resources to be able to get that going. And then there was another comment that I've heard a few times today, and it is the idea that, how do we make everyone innovators in local government? The answer is you probably don't, right? I think working as an innovator inside the public sector is not for everyone, right? And even when you start some kind of an innovation agenda, initiative, strategy, whatever you want to call it, the early adopters will probably show up, right? And that's where you start. I think that is for us the way that we think about systems change, is that you don't start with everyone. You start with those people that want to do this, and they use them as drivers, and you make them into, you give them the resources and the time and the cover to innovate, right? So this is something else. Now everything is falling into my head. I don't remember everything. The idea, the innovators need cover, right? So that you can't simply say, go forth and innovate. You need to give people the tools, the skills, the capacity, the space, and the protection to innovate. And so those are things that are both reliant on a distributed model of innovation, everyone potentially working to work in a new way, with support from some kind of a centralized function, right, to give them the cover to do those things. And so I think it really depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Some really great kind of food for thought. My final kind of speaker is Shatha Al-Hashmi. She's the director of Mohammed bin Rashid's Center for Government Innovation. So essentially, her boss is the king of the country, and who's been a kind of pioneer in leading some wonderful changes in transforming the way Dubai and the UAE approach innovation and innovate in the public services. Shatha's background is across a range of emirates, but I guess the main anchor is that wherever you've worked at a very strategic, at a high level, about changing the way that people think about the challenges that you face as a country and the opportunities that there are and how people take advantage of them, from economic development all the way through to innovation. Shatha, can you take us through kind of your model of innovation and the work that you're doing?
Sure, thank you, Shrupti. So the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation was established in late 2014, so we're less than 1 year old. And our working model is based on three main pillars. One of them is enabling capabilities, and I've heard a lot about capability building all throughout the day-to-day. The second pillar is enriching the innovation culture within the government, and our scope is the federal government, and whoever knows about the United Arab Emirates, we have seven Emirates. The third pillar is focusing on experimenting with ideas, and this is where the lab functions fall. Before the center was established, the government innovation labs were running for a while, and we have 84,000 federal employees in the government across 46 ministries and 7 emirates. So you can see that, I mean, I think I relate to Stephanie within your scope of work as well, trying to cover 7 emirates, all government employees. I mean, we were broadly inspired by the Adobe Kickstarter box, where we documented and we launched last month the innovation framework for the UAE government, and thanks to Nesta, who helped us write that document. We have injected that document with context-specific information that is related to the government of the United Arab Emirates. And we are also lucky because we are incubated at the Prime Minister office. So we work hand in hand with the strategy and policy team, and we leverage on the expertise and the subject matter experts. And whoever have interacted with our offices, they know that we try to run the labs, but we also depend on the subject matter experts from the different sectors that we focus on. 2015 was declared as the Year of Innovation for the United Arab Emirates. So what we did is, based on the framework of the country, we tried to go around the different emirates to launch this innovation framework. We reached out to 2,000 federal government employees, and we asked them to read this document. We asked them also to go back to their entities and try to figure out how to innovate by themselves. As I'm sure you heard that also throughout the day-to-day, the language for public sector innovation is very new to the government employees, and also even trying to translate it to Arabic, even within the MENA region. I mean, the language of Arabic is varied, so that's a challenge on top of the challenges that we're trying to tackle. In the last government summit, which was held in February, the minister and the prime minister, who's Sheikh Mohammed, he's the ruler of Dubai, prime minister of the United Arab Emirates, the president is Sheikh Khalifa, they've announced a new position in the government, which is the chief innovation officer. This position, wasn't announced to be, to have a unit by itself. No, it's a role on top of the existing role. So we don't want to overburden the government with budgets. What we did is we asked government employees to apply, whoever see themselves fit to take this position, and we're working with a University of Cambridge, the Judge Business School, into taking this government employees. We're meeting with them every 2 months. They come to our offices, and we talk to them about the different tools for innovation, and we help them to go and innovate. So when they go back to their day-to-day job within their entities, they can help us diffuse government or public sector innovation and help work within their teams. These employees are also tasked to start the innovation individual entities plan. So every entity from the 46 federal entities is also tasked to start their own innovation plans. It's worth to say that we have 55 employees who are going through that program from 35 entities, so we're almost there. The other entities who did not make it to this program, we bring them to our offices, and we try to interact with them, and also for them not to feel that they have missed that opportunity. These are the catalysts for innovation. So if you can see, these are like the I teams where they can go back and diffuse that. One of the labs that it's worth mentioning for us that happened back in 2013, it's called the Ministerial Retreat. So the lab model is very interactive. In that Ministerial Retreat, His Highness tweeted asking the citizens to suggest for him solution to challenges within the health education sector within the country. So the Prime Minister had 70,000 tweets, and the team at the Prime Minister office were going through all that, and I'm sure, Shrupti, you can relate to that idea because you were there at that time. And the lab had a multi-stakeholder approach. We had the Prime Minister there, we had ministers, we had undersecretary, we had parents, we had nurses, teachers, students, all on one table trying to tackle these challenges. So as you can see, they were there was real-time feedback on tackling the challenges, to develop solution for the challenges that they have chose. It was a fast-tracked, very collaborative, accelerated decision-making approach because everyone was there. Of course, there were themes that they were predefined. We have in the UAE the 2021 vision, and within the 2021 vision, we had the key national priority areas across all sectors. So all the country and the government entities are working towards these priority areas, so they don't have to go back to their that was defined before in a very collaborative approach. They don't have to go back to there and think, oh, what should we do next? I mean, there are key priority areas, and we're looking for achieving them within the next 5 years. I mean, Christian Bassan this morning was saying that the leader role is to understand what to do and also to get personal with the citizens. That doesn't, the Prime Minister have showed that over and over all the time. He gets really personal. He, goes there to the citizens, asks them, reach out to them through social media. And I think that the lab had a couple of outcomes that are targeted. They are monitored as well. It's not that we meet and then we go and everyone goes back to their offices and they don't know what to do. No, they are monitored by the Prime Minister office. And to your point, we leverage upon the expertise of the policy and strategy team. There are so many challenges, but for the sake of time, I'm going to open the floor, for you, Shrupti, so they can have more time to ask questions. Maybe we can tackle the challenges through the questions.
Thank you. So with that, I'd like to open the floor up to questions you may have. As you can see, there are various different models. There are models where actually the prime kind of beneficiaries are people outside your organization and you're building capabilities in others. There are those who are, some of you will be kind of expert in a particular area of public policy versus a kind of broad range of things. So I'd be really interested in kind of both hearing your questions, but also any insights you have from your own model and how it may differ or be similar to the models that people have described here.
Hi, my name is Giancarlo Duran. I'm from the Laboratorio de Gobierno, the government lab from Chile. I'm the head of innovation skills in the lab, so you think maybe this is kind of interesting for me, right? I'm going to take something that Nigel said, but I'm going to ask you all four. You said that public servants, they need skills, motivations, capabilities, right? But you also said that they need a support from a centralized function, body, I don't know. What do you mean with that? What kind of specific things have you experienced the public servants need?
Well, from my perspective, so I don't know, maybe I'll go back, take one step back from that. I'll say you can certainly drive innovation without a centralized kind of seat, essentially. But I think that, especially if you're starting from early days, having a place where people can go to get training or to get resources, funding, as well as to get some cover for what they're doing, I think is really important. So the way that I think about this is that there needs to be someone that understands each organization, each public sector organization has a different way of thinking about the risk that they can incur. You know, for those of us that work in cities, oftentimes the risk is basically a bad headline, right? And then the negative phone calls that you get back from the press or from the mayor. And so that's something that the innovation hub, whatever you want to call it, office, chief innovation officer, whoever, that they can mitigate, right? They can be the one that intercepts the negative phone calls back into the organization, so that we can act as a buffer between people that would give us a hard time and the actual innovator. So that's what I'm thinking around a centralized function.
So I'll just jump in if I can really quickly. Permission, like bureaucracies are permission-based cultures. So they need permission from the top, but it also needs to trickle down through every level, because a lot of the disconnection around innovation is that the head of your agency, of course, wants innovation and tells their senior management team that, but that trickles down to how many things, and the people who are on the ground have operational concerns that are actually mostly at odds with that message of innovation. So there needs to be a way to drive that coherently through the organization, and that takes resources and a place to go and all the kind of supports around that, but it's that permission piece for me that's most important.
Yeah, and I'll tack on, I'd say that to that point of what does that home team provide? What does that I team provide from the centralized? It does those things. Well, actually, it doesn't provide the permissions that they need politically or through a bureaucracy to actually change, right? I think and maybe they can influence that. That really depends on where they sit in the government, politics. That's a lot of things. They might be able to help with that. But I'd say at the core foundation of what I think the role should be is to provide permission to break the rules, right? To provide a space where they walk in and they suddenly feel like they can shed this old skin and to step into something new, and this freedom to create, permission to fail, permission to try something different, permission to be inspired again, and to think differently, to really be that first initial catalyst to light the spark, I think is one of the central functions if it does nothing else.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more. Yeah.
Hi, Jim Maltby from the Ministry of Defence. One of the things you talked about before, breaking rules and things like that, how have you seen that anyone change the way that people's performance is measured? So in the public sector, quite often you're there for 2 years and your performance evaluation is how successfully you change things in that short period of time. There's no imperative to change things dramatically, take risks and break the rules.
Do you mean performance from the individual, like are we measuring individual performance of the innovation lab itself?
As in HR?
HR, okay, yeah, great. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, hello, I'm Ketil Borvik from the Norwegian government. Regards to a centralized versus a distributed systems, we haven't talked so much about culture, and we obviously represent different polities, different cultures, different institutional cultures. Is a lab more suited to a specific polity and a specific culture? Do we see any emerging patterns?
So who would like to take those?
I can take the first one. I'll go to the HR performance one. We are not there yet. Certainly, I mean, the federal government, 2 million people, it's a lot of performance bureau. There's a lot of rules around human resource management and staff management in a giant civil service system. I will say, though, that the government is putting into it, there's a federal survey that they do. Oh, God, I always get this acronym wrong. Employee Viewpoint Survey. And it's taken across a very large scale, sample size across the federal government. And there are direct questions about creativity, about innovation. So we are measuring it on people's individual feelings about how what capacity that they have, what's their ability to actually do those things within the agency. So there is a measurement on some of the agencies to start understanding that, and that gets down to very individual group levels. It is not directly built into, actually that's not true. There are some performance indicators right now around innovation. They're very loose, but they are there. We're starting to see them, and I'll stop there.
I think we've just come to time, but I don't want to leave it without having answered the very last question around kind of culture.
I can be very quick. I would say that culture absolutely matters, and you would have no better opportunity than to find out the culture of this ecosystem than today with all of your colleagues. And if you want to talk about the Canadian experience, we can do that afterwards, but I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to talk to everyone about the lab culture and how it situates within their own jurisdiction, because that's where you're going to find that information.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, because in the UAE government, we also identified the culture of innovation as a key strategic area as well. And within the individual plans of the organizations that I've mentioned earlier, we also talk about culture, and we merge them with key performance indicators as well around that.
One last comment there. So I think that you develop your innovation team in relation to your culture. So it should reflect the culture that you have there.
Totally. Thank you. I just want to thank the audience. Thank the audience, but also the panelists very, very much for all of their wonderful insights. Thank you.